So you heard President Xi Jinping yesterday. He kind of rolled out some familiar promises and pledges. Are we facing some pledge fatigue from the Chinese, or what's your initial reading?
Well, the rhetoric was certainly all in the right place. We have seen some market liberalization in China. In the last time I was here, we were negotiating over dairy market access for UK products, which was worth a lot to places like Northern Ireland. So we have seen market liberalization in some sectors. This time we've been pushing very much for service sector liberalization. We've seen a 28.5% increase in UK exports to China in the past year. But unlike our exports to the rest of the world, which are about 50% goods and 50% services, our exports to China are 82% goods, which is indicative of the fact the service market remains relatively closed. Now, today we've been discussing issues of healthcare and of education and of tech. And these are areas where we need liberalisation. For financial services, one of the UK's biggest exports, to really achieve traction here, we need a different regulatory framework.
Right, and this morning at a press conference, you did complain about the local laws are applied unevenly, as well as they can change overnight. How much of a hindrance is that for you?
I think there is a difficulty in the Chinese system. I think people believe that the president simply said something and it will happen throughout the entire system, including the regional government. That's not always true. But one of the things that we can do is help with that in getting the services sector moving. So that's where it becomes a win-win.
Now, on Brexit, have you spoken to the Chinese government or officials and how deeply about their opposition to the UK's plan to have its own WTO tariff rate quotas?
If anything, the Chinese government officials that we speak to regard Brexit as an opportunity. And they see that the UK will be able to set its own trade policy for the first time in 40 years. In fact, the further you get away from the epicenter of Brussels, the more people can see the opportunities that it brings. And of course, on our tariffs, we have said that we want to replicate the EU tariffs as much as possible in terms of our EU schedules. There will be some disaggregation of TRQs. We've set out a methodology in line and alongside the EU for that. And we've started what is described as an Article 28 discussion on that disaggregation.
But that could delay the process quite considerably.
Not really, no, because we will be able to trade on schedules that are not certified. And I hear some of the pro-Europeans throwing their hands up in horror in my own party on that, except that we are currently trading on uncertified schedules as an EU member. In fact, we didn't trade on certified schedules between 2004 and 2016. And that was the EU 25, and by the time we got to EU 25, we were 27. So the services schedules we're trading on are decades old, so this is not an unusual occurrence.
We're going to have to shout over the drums that have started. Okay, they've calmed down a bit. But let's talk about what's happening. Of course, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, you won't be there today, at least, when they're going to be really hunkering down to discuss the latest negotiations on Brexit. Would you say, of course, as try to overcome the issues with the Irish border backstop, would you say it's more likely to have a no deal or a deal? What's more likely right now?
Well, I spoke to the Prime Minister last night, and as I have repeatedly said, there are a number of issues that need to be dealt with. And for me, as a Conservative and Unionist, it's unacceptable to have any one part of the United Kingdom treated differently from any other part. We joined the European community as a United Kingdom. We will leave the European Union as a United Kingdom. And there can be no pick and mix in terms of what's applicable to different parts of the UK.
Yeah, and as far as, would you prefer a customs backstop that the UK can't unilaterally exit from, or can?
Well, the voters have given us an instruction, which is that we are to leave the European Union. Right. It wasn't a request. And if we are able to do so, there has to be a mechanism where ultimately we determine that we're out of the EU and its processes. But I'm sure it's possible, given that we expect there to be a future economic partnership agreement in the implementation period towards the end of 2020, for us to reach an accommodation on what would be a temporary measure if we weren't physically able to do it on time. But there can be no question of the United Kingdom being kept in the European Union or the European Union's customs union against Britain's will.
Can you share with me what your red line would be?
Well, it's the fact that we must be able to leave the European Union, and we can't be kept indefinitely in an EU limbo against our will, and that we can't have any part of the UK treated differently from any other. So, if you like, that's two red lines for the price of one.
How important is it to have an independent trade policy in goods? How important is that to you?
Well, it's very important for the future of the United Kingdom. We're able to have an independent trade policy. But we've got countries, not least here, lining up to talk to the UK, who see the benefits of having free access to the fifth biggest economy in the world. They look at the UK's capabilities in services in particular, and in financial services in particular, and want to ensure that the UK is going to be able to deliver it for their economies as well as our own. That's where the advantages will come. That's where the interest is being shown. Some of the countries here have been complaining that they didn't get high-level visits from the Chinese government. Yesterday at this pavilion we have the Chinese president, the deputy premier, the foreign minister and the trade minister all visiting at different times during the day. I think that's indicative of the attraction that Britain has seen from other countries.
What sense are you getting from the Chinese leaders that you're talking to about how they're going to play this trade dispute with the United States, whether they're in it for the long game, and what the ultimate ramifications to global trade are going to be?
Our message to both the Chinese government and the US government is the same, that we believe in a rules-based system. We believe any dispute should be settled by the WTO at Geneva. We don't disagree with some of the analysis made by the United States about what the problems are, about overproduction in things like steel, or the lack of transparency, the difficulty knowing what's state-owned and not state-owned, but we don't believe that the mechanism as being deployed is the correct one. It should be sorted out at Geneva.